Hello everybody, Anthony Metivier here with an introduction to the Hermetic art of memory. And what's this all about? Well, recently I finished the draft of my next book on memory techniques and meditation, and I was sitting there meditating, and it suddenly dawned on me as I was doing some mudras with my hands in these meditations that this is what happened in this era of the Hermeticists. And I thought, wow, I've got to go now and I've got to get started. And a lot of things have come together. William, who sometimes joins us, was mentioning Hermeticism in his own thing, and I thought that might be how the percolation came together. And so I have here my handy research index cards, and I have this article, and we're going to learn about what all this Hermeticism is, and going to go through this material today. And really, really exciting, because there's obviously lots of things to memorize and lots to talk about, especially when it seems so clear that what Bruno, Giordano, and the others were on about is really related to what I just finished researching with Advaita Vedanta and the relationship between memory and meditation. So one of the things that a lot of these Hermeticists did was rituals that are essentially, it seems to me, very, very similar to what goes on in some of the meditation traditions, and how they treat the whole role of the relationship between memory and consciousness as being the same. So if you're joining us, hit the thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing in the chat, if you are so obliged to do so, if it's safe, if you're not driving, if you're joining the replay later, feel free to leave some sort of discussion below, and likewise, hit that thumbs up. All right, so let's get started. Now, in case you don't know the name John Michael Greer, at some point last year, he released his own translation of On the Shadows of the Ideas, and so this is the basis of something that I've been working on for a while, or it is supplementing something I've been working on for a while. I'm very, very excited about that book. So if you haven't read this, you really want to grab that and start to understand the deep historical importance of these techniques and what it was that they did in the past, and how that what they did in the past can help us with our own practice. If you want to follow along with this article we're going to read today, the link for that is down in the description below, along with a link to the replay of the original live stream that we did about this. And so John Michael Greer is the person who wrote this article today, and really interesting figure. All right, so to begin, Part 1, the uses of memory. In the current occult revival, the art of memory is perhaps the most thoroughly neglected of all the technical methods of Renaissance esotericism. While the researches of the late Dame Frances Yates, and more recently a revival of interest in the master mnemonist Giordano Bruno, have made the art something of a known quantity in academic circles, the same is not true in the wider community. To mention the art of memory in most occult circles nowadays, to say nothing of the general public, is to invite blank looks. Well, certainly not with people like Adolfo. Good to see you, Adolfo. Thanks for saying hello. If you're joining us, hit that thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, how you're feeling, and if you have questions about memory or what we're talking about today, feel free to pop them in. In its day, though, the mnemonic methods of the art held a special place among the contents of the practicing magician's mental toolkit. The Neoplatonic philosophy, which underlay the whole structure of Renaissance magic, gave memory, and thus techniques of mnemonics, a crucial place in the work of inner transformation. In turn, this interpretation of memory gave rise to a new understanding of the art, turning what had once been a purely practical way of storing useful information into a meditative discipline, calling on all the powers of the will and the imagination. So let's pause on that, because this is really, really important to understand, is that when we are using memory techniques, we are actually practicing acts of will to get ourselves to do them. And it's like an everyday exercise in that little amount of power you have to shape your destiny, to shape your activities. Using memory techniques is not just using memory techniques. It's also using acts of will, which even in a world absent of free will, enables you to strengthen the acts of will you actually can take inside of a field of potential action, potential movement, potential selection of your ability to operate in the world. And what I like here too is in that first paragraph, Yeats is mentioned. And one of the quirky things about Yeats is she wrote a really good book about memory techniques, but she never actually used them herself. And I've often thought, one of these days I got to get around to writing Art of Memory 2.0 from the perspective of someone who can do historical work, do scholarly work, but actually uses the techniques, because there's something tremendously lacking in those books. And I don't know that I could do a better book as a historian, but I think that there's something to be supplemented there, to look at all that stuff again from the perspective of somebody who's using the techniques and is also a scholar. Amjad is in the house. Good to see you in Pakistan. Thanks for saying hello. If you're interested in this, make sure you let me know. And I'm curious the extent to which you have an interest in the history of memory techniques, and if we should do more of this. And you can always vote with silence as well. But I'm certainly interested in it, and I'm curious to the extent to which you are, because I think it's very, very important. And I think it'll be something that gets even more important as you grow with the techniques, if you want to grow, because there's so much to be unpacked from the history. So Reclaiming Life is here. I just mentioned you. I don't know if you caught that, but something you said was certainly part of the percolation of something that went into my mind recently. You say, with this topic, is John Michael Greer's translation of Bruno worth the cost, especially with it being secondhand market now? Well, I don't know what you would pay for this secondhand, but worth the cost, we've had this discussion before, and it would be pretty much the same answer. If you want to know as much as you possibly can know about this amazing tradition and the different ways that you could approach it, absolutely. And, you know, when I do a course on this book, sorry, I hit the microphone there. When I do a course on this book, obviously you're going to need to read the book, because that course, it'll make sense. It'll help. But the ideas that I've derived to add to your practice, we can't reprint the whole book in the course. I can sort of generally say what's going on there. But yeah, it's worth it. It's worth every single penny. This is not only a beautiful object that amounts to art, right? But it also is, I think, the strongest translation that I've seen. And not only that, but it's beautifully done and arranged. And one of the reasons why my new book is taking so long is because I've taken this gorgeousness as an indicator of what can be done and what maybe should be done. Now, obviously, we don't know all the ins and outs of what's going to happen with my new book, but this is something I've looked at as a model for the mark that we need to hit. Secondhand market prices for books such as Trident or Ouroboros or other esoteric publishers are quite inflated. Oh, I see. So it's more expensive on the secondhand market. I'm not a book collector, so I don't really understand that world. But all I can say is that if you don't have it, it's worth getting it. And I don't know if they're going to do another print, but I believe they said that they were going to do a paperback edition. And so, Adolfo, I don't know if it's on Amazon. I don't think it is. I think it's sold out because they only did a limited run. And I mean, this is as I mentioned when I did the previous live stream. It's like, get it now, because you never know what's going to happen. So. Yeah, but apparently they had mentioned at one point that they're going to do a paperback edition, but I don't think the paperback edition is going to have the je ne sais quoi that this one has. All right, so thank you for those questions. Keep them coming if you're joining us. Hit the thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking, any questions you have whatsoever about anything related to memory or this project that I'm working on. By all means, pop them in and we'll get them answered. So this article seeks to reintroduce the art of memory to the modern Western esoteric tradition as a practicable technique. This first part, the uses of memory, will give an overview of the nature and development of the art's methods and explore some of the reasons why the art has value for the modern esotericist. The second part, the Garden of Memory, will present a basic Hermetic memory system designed along traditional lines and making use of Renaissance magical symbolism as a basis for experimentation and practical use. So what do you guys say, you who are here and are safely with your hands not on automobile steering wheels? Are you interested in this? Should we carry on? Should we go through this? Let me know in the chat. I'm going to catch up with what William is saying here, and let me know your interest in this, and we'll carry on with the method and its development and the promise that this article is actually going to teach us something about what we can do. Let me know loud and clear. So, Reclaiming Life is definitely interested. Adolfo, Reclaiming Life says, I'll see if I can get in touch with Frank, the owner of the publishing company, or JMG, and see what I can work out. Yeah, great. And I did try to follow up with the publisher, and I didn't hear back. So I don't know if that email got through to him, but I was going to order a bunch in bulk for the coming course that I want to do. But I didn't get an answer, so... and I have no way of getting in touch with John Michael Greer, despite having had many requests now to have him on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast, which I'd love to do. All right. Amjad says, why does top memory expert Harry Lorayne prefer the PEG system to the Memory Palace system? Great question, Amjad. Thanks for asking it. You know, I can't put words in another person's mouth, but one thing to consider is, why do you think the PEG system is not a Memory Palace system? And it's not clear to me that it's not a Memory Palace system for Harry either. So let me know, Amjad, what you think the difference is between PEGs and a Memory Palace. Bruno first, who I'm starting to put together a full review of all his works, he, on the surface, seems to think they're different, but he doesn't treat them differently. The extent to which Harry Lorayne treats them differently, you know, I need to know what you're thinking in your head to answer that question. But I don't see that they're that different, other than how powerful they are and how powerful you want to make them. So great question, but part of the answer is just simply, why do you think they're different? What is different about them? And when you discover what those differences are, you'll figure out what the similarities are, and then you'll go, oh. So let me know more about what you think the differences are. All right, so we've got some interest here in this text. Reclaiming Life says, I know multiple people who have been published by them and have contacts that could be made with JMG through Druidic studies, even though he has stepped down formally. Yeah, excellent. I mean, I kind of have the idea of maybe asking them about my new book, but, you know, we'll see. I wouldn't mind having it done by a printing house or a publishing house that can get it in more places, but I'm not sure. But it'd be an interesting discussion to at least have, especially since that I'm in this position that I'm in. All right, so carrying on, the method and its development. It was once almost mandatory to begin a treatise on the art of memory with the classical legend of its invention. This habit has something to recommend it, for the story of Simonides is more than a colorful anecdote. It also offers a good introduction in the basics of the technique. The poet Simonides of Kos, as the tale has it, was hired to recite an ode at a nobleman's banquet. Now, notice he points out something very, very important that I pointed out myself before. This story actually includes in it the methods of using memory palaces if you pay close attention. Let's see if we can pull that out of it. In the fashion of the time, the poet began with a few lines in praise of divinities, in this case Castor and Pollux, before going on to the serious business of talking about his host. The host, however, objected to this diversion of the flattery, deducted half of Simonides' fee, and told the poet he could seek the rest from the gods he had praised. Shortly thereafter, a message was brought to the poet that 2 young men had come to the door of the house and wished to speak to him. When Simonides went to see them, there was no one there, but in his absence, the banquet hall collapsed behind him, killing the impious nobleman and all the dinner guests as well. Castor and Pollux, traditionally imaged as 2 young men, had indeed paid half of the fee. Tales of this sort were a commonplace in Greek literature, but this one has an unexpected moral. When the rubble was cleared away, the victims were found to be so mangled that their own families could not identify them. Simonides, however, called to memory an image of the banqueting hall as he had last seen it, and from this was able to recall the order of the guests at the table. Pondering this, according to the legend, he proceeded to invent the first classical art of memory. The story is certainly apocryphal, but the key elements of the technique it describes, the use of mental images placed in ordered, often architectural settings, remained central to the whole tradition of the art of memory throughout its history, and provided the framework on which the Hermetic adaptation of the art was built. So, he's not pointing out, though, why that this skill it teaches us the skill. So, and also, it's a little bit of a different version than we sometimes hear, because here he's suggesting that Simonides derived the technique from being able to remember where the people were, whereas other versions tell it that actually he knew where people were because he used memory techniques in order to memorize them. So the memory palace technique already existed, which is the more likely version of the story, since having information paired with locations is far earlier than the Greek tradition, much, much earlier. So we will bolt down into why that tells us how to use memory techniques in a minute, but let's carry on with the next paragraph. Tales of this sort were a commonplace in Greek literature, but this one has an unexpected moral. Oh, we already read this. Sorry about that. In Roman schools of rhetoric, this approach to memory was refined into a precise and practical system. Students were taught to memorize the insides of large buildings according to certain rules, dividing the space into specific loci or places and marking every 5th and 10th locus with special signs. Facts to be remembered were converted into striking visual images and placed one after another in these loci. When needed, the rhetorician needed only to stroll in his imagination through the same building, noticing the images in order and recalling their meanings. At a more advanced level, images could be created for individual words or sentences so that large passages of text could be stored in the memory in the same way. Roman rhetoricians using these methods reached dizzying levels of mnemonic skill. One famous practitioner of the art was recorded to have sat through a day-long auction and at its end repeated from memory the item, purchaser, and price for every sale of the day. With the disintegration of the Roman world, these same techniques became part of the classical heritage of Christianity. The art of memory took on a moral cast as memory itself was defined as a part of the virtue of prudence, and in this guise the art came to be cultivated by the Dominican order. It was from this source that the ex-Dominican Giordano Bruno, probably the art's greatest exponent, drew the basis of his own techniques. All right, so he's not getting into the actual reason why that the tale of Simonides tells us how the memory techniques work, so let's fill in that blank after we say hello to Sevink and to Physico. Good to see you. If you're joining us, hit the thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking. Amjad says, for me, the memory palace is real. I can visit them, see them, and touch them in real life, while PEG system does not give me that powerful feeling. Great. So now, why is it that you think that your stations in a memory palace aren't PEGs? That's really what I'm trying to get at here. What is the key difference? This is a teaching moment. I'm not going to tell you what it is that I think, but rather encourage you to process it for yourself and see if you can find where I'm trying to lead you, because that revelation will improve how you use pegs, and it will improve how you use memory palaces. And that is, if I do it well, the art of teaching. Hopefully you will get there. Hockey is here from Bathurst. Okay. I've never been there, but I know Bathurst Street in Toronto. Good to see you, Adam. Thanks for saying hello. Thanks for being here. If you're joining us, also hit that thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, and how things are going, and if you have any questions. All right. So, yeah. Why is that story such a revelation for how the techniques work? Well, this version is not really the same as others, but if you think about how that we actually make associations, we make them dramatic, we make them bigger than life, larger than life. And one of the things that's happening here is that there's drama in the story, right? So this person, the host of the banquet, is feeling ripped off, and then in a way of getting revenge through irony or through some sort of ironic gesture, he says, well, if you think pastor and colics are so great, then they can pay the fee, or half the fee in this case, Castor and Pollux. Sorry, that was almost a Spoonerism there, wasn't it? But it's the drama, it's the theater, it's the one character acting on another, right? That's part of what we use in the techniques, in addition to the spatial arrangements. And then the actual violent action of the earthquake or whatever is making the building be destroyed, the banquet hall being destroyed, that is another lesson in the story of how big and large and action movie-like we need to be making our images in order to make them really stick. And then the other thing that's really, really central is the role of recall, right? So it's that Simonides goes back into his head and he recalls on a station-by-station basis what was there, or who was there in this case. So the story teaches us how the techniques work. And thank goodness, because even if it wasn't the first, it certainly made an impact and helped preserve these techniques. And with the disintegration of the Roman world, these same techniques became part of the classical heritage of Christianity. The art of memory took on a moral cast, as memory itself was defined as the virtue of prudence, and in this guise, the art came to be cultivated by the Dominican order. It was from this source that the ex-Dominican Giordano Bruno, probably the art's greatest exponent, drew the basis of his own techniques. Right, so a little bit of repetition there, but one of the things that you want to maybe follow up on is down in the description for this video below. There's a link to an interview with Scott Gosnell, who translated Bruno also, and you might want to listen to that because it goes into some of this history as well. So we'll carry on with the medieval methods and catch up with Reclaiming Life, saying, a station can have a whole series of pegs at it. It can be reversed with things like alphabetically correlated memory palaces, but it seems easier to me for any station in a memory palace to have pegs. Yes, that's what I'm hoping for people to begin to understand. And I think it's in my mind, just the idea of alphabetizing memory palaces makes each memory palace a peg in and of itself. So it's the only peg you can actually go into, right? And that's the whole thing, is why is a memory palace not a peg within which you identify other pegs, right? I don't see that there's some massive difference there, but when you change your perspective, you begin to see how to improve all of the different techniques. Roland is in the house. Privyet. Thanks for joining us in this memory palace. Davlavi is here. Good to see you again. Thanks for saying hello. And really appreciate everybody being here today. So, medieval methods of the art differed very little from those of the classical world, but certain changes in the late Middle Ages helped lay the foundations for the Hermetic art of memory of the Renaissance. One of the most important of these was a change in the frameworks used for memory loci. Along with the architectural settings most often used in the classical tradition, medieval mnemonists also came to make use of the whole Ptolemaic cosmos of nested spheres as a setting for memory images. So nested spheres, right? Nested pegs. It's not that different. It's just a terminological thing and a perspective. Each sphere, from God at the periphery through the angelic, celestial, and elemental levels down to hell at the center, thus held one or more loci for memory images. Between this system and that of the Renaissance Hermeticists, there is only one significant difference, and that is a matter of interpretation, not of technique. Steeped in Neoplatonic thought, I love those Neoplatonic thoughts. The Hermetic magicians of the Renaissance saw the universe as an image of the divine ideas and the individual human being as an image of the universe. They also knew Plato's claim that all learning is simply the recollection of things known before birth into the realm of matter. This is related to the concept of aletheia. Taken together, these ideas raised the art of memory to a new dignity. If the human memory could be reorganized in the image of the universe in this view, it became a reflection of the entire realm of ideas in their fullness and thus the key to universal knowledge. This concept was the driving force behind the complex systems of memory created by several Renaissance Hermeticists, and above all, those of Giordano Bruno. Now, when you get into Bruno, it's actually, there's a lot of this business about a ladder and transcending and all sorts of things that we can get into, or maybe is going to be gotten into here in this article. But one of the things here about Neoplatonism is that, here Greer is talking about God as being the periphery, but in a Neoplatonic sense, really, if anything, God would be central, and at least in Plotinus's philosophy, and I don't know to what extent that the Neoplatonic people withheld this, but it's almost as if there's a central core, and from that core is seeping through in a radiant way all of this energy that basically is the very world that is creeping from the core, right? So it's almost, if you really read Plotinus, it's almost like he's describing and anticipating what scientists will discover later, which is to say that the world that we live on is the death of a star, right? So a star dies, and then all of this brutal energy just becomes so brutal that some sort of dust forms around it, and then that dust around the core starts to settle in a particular way, and as it's settling, it's putting pressure down back upon its origin, and then that pressure creates gases and etc. Those gases push through this crust that's conforming there, or beginning to be created there, and then when those push through, a new layer is created, which then traps the gases turn into rain, etc., falls down on the crust, turns into the soil. Then later some plants come, and organisms, single-celled organisms after the plants, or however all that works, right? And this is essentially what Plotinus is describing as the creation of all things being deeply connected to the source, and essentially just cycling through, etc. So it's very interesting how that all works. And then if you match it onto some of the Vedantic material in the Vedas and so forth, they're pretty much saying the same thing, which makes us wonder if they traded ideas with the Greeks, which may have been the case, but there's a lot more similarities than differences at the end of the day. Physico asks, do you really think that to use Bruno's systems, you need to be a mnemonist with a big practice on the bag? Well, Physico, thanks for that question. I do not think that you are spending time well trying to use anybody else's system. The role and the goal is to learn the methods and the principles that underlie how that people created their systems, and create your own, because you're going to create your own anyway. Even to model a system is to create your own. It's very, very important to do that. And I don't think anybody's time is well spent trying to use anybody else's system. The closest that we have to that is the Major and the Memory Palace, and following some good best practices. But by all means, if you want to get this and read this and model it, then I would love to hear how that's going for you. I have heard some people say, oh no, I've dogmatically replicated it to the nth degree and I use it exactly that way. And I'm just like, great. And I start to ask them questions and it's like, oh no, well, I changed that and that. So the reality of it always comes through at some level. And one ultimately will find out what it is that's going on relative to their integrity to just telling the truth of what goes on in their own minds. So that's important. Roland asked, is this a book? I've arrived a little late to the stream, so I'm a little lost. So no, this is an article from John Michael Greer. And if you look in the description below, you can find a link to that article to go through later if you choose. But thanks for the question. Thanks for being here. And really appreciate having you all here. All right, Physico says, yeah, I model my mental model based on other systems. To copy is a waste of mental energy. Indeed. Well, I mean, it depends on what you mean by copy, but one of the things that you want to consider is, do you understand what it is that's guiding the creation of the model in the first place? And sometimes by doing a bit of quote unquote copying, you'll come to understand that. But it's rarely necessary. So for example, narratology, which I studied at university, I didn't have to write a screenplay in order to learn narratology. And learning narratology made it much more likely that I wound up actually working on screenplays, which I was very happy to do for quite some time. And even wrote some books on screenwriting that were well received, and taught as a film professor, and wrote a novel that, did quite well when it was released. And so, I didn't understand that by copying out, some other books, or screenplays. I understood it by just understanding it and then putting it into action. And so, yeah, I think just copying will never get you that far. Same thing with music. You can learn all the songs in the world that you want, but they're not going to be a replacement for you understanding the way to write songs and just going out and writing them. All right, Rohit is here. How can one use this system for learning for schoolwork test? Well, just as I answered Physico, thanks for that question, by the way. One of the ways that you do it is you actually learn the methods and the principles, and then you create the systems that are guided and directed towards what you need to do with your schooling at your work. So what are you studying, and how many memory palaces do you need? And when are you going to get started creating your first memory palace network? Davlavi says, love learning history of ideas. This is a neat article. Awesome, awesome. Great. Well, let's continue. If you're joining us, hit that thumbs up. If you're not subscribed to this channel, get subscribed. Hit the bell icon for future live streams. And if you're watching the replay, get involved in the discussion below. And likewise, hit that thumbs up. Oh, by the way, apparently over on Facebook, it's against the law now to ask people to hit thumbs up and all that stuff. What? The thought police are coming in hard. All right. Bruno's mnemonic systems form, to a great extent, the high watermark of the Hermetic art of memory. His methods were dizzyingly complex and involve a combination of images, ideas, and alphabets, which require a great deal of mnemonic skill to learn in the first place. Exclamation point. Hermetic philosophy and the traditional images of astrological magic appear constantly in his work, linking the framework of his art to the wider framework of the magical cosmos. The difficulty of Bruno's technique, though, has been magnified unnecessarily by authors whose lack of personal experience with the art has led them to mistake fairly straightforward mnemonic methods for philosophical obscurities. Yeah, and that's why this is a really good update to the work. But also, the problem is that Bruno is relying on the existing competence of his era. So a lot of the references are known to the audience, right? He doesn't have to teach them those things because it's known to them. And that's why a lot of people, they're like, well, can I use Bruno? Should I model Bruno? The answer is, of course not. Understand it, learn it, but don't go and then memorize the Sagittarius and Aquarius and yada, 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 just so that you can use that. You don't need to do that. I mean, that's just antiquated stuff that he seems to be assuming everybody knows already, right? And one theory is that some of these philosophical references are made and so forth in order to lock out the wrong audience, so that only people who are equipped with quote unquote correct levels of intelligence and the like are actually able to read and perceive the books. I think that maybe there's something to that, but by the same token, we're talking about a period of history where literacy wasn't what it is today. So you didn't even have to go to those links, really. Although I'm certain that there's something to that argument. And Bruno himself, if you read this, he himself makes these sort of riddles and claims, and, if you don't have this, then you'll never get that, and yada, yada, yada. And those are just games that people play. And back to the question of, why Harry Lorayne doesn't like memory palaces and so forth. You never know the extent to which he himself is playing a bit of a game and using that to be a bit of a Saturnine character and to create an image of a character in your mind. Likewise, in my research on Bruno first, I'm really not convinced that that's his name. He probably took a pen name, and I don't know. We'll see. All right, so Physico says, what guides me to get memory systems is a desire to find a practical way to learn faster. I just get some ideas from people, not copying exactly, just the ideas that are practical, not everything. That is an inspiration for me, not copy. Excellent. So, good points. And, systems might not be the thing that gets you faster. That's the thing you need to ultimately consider. Carrying on, a central example of this is the confusion caused by Bruno's practice of linking images to combinations of two letters. Yeats' interpretations of Brunoian memory rested largely on an identification of this with the letter combinations of Eulism, or Louisism. You hear that pronounced so many different ways. Louisism, the half-Kabbalistic philosophical system of Raymond Louis. While Louisist influences certainly played a part in Bruno's system, interpreting that system solely in Louisist terms misses the practical use of the combinations. They enable the same set of images to be used to remember ideas, words, or both at the same time. Yeah, and there's actually different ways of interpreting multiple alphabets. I know Adolfo has encountered a multiple alphabet system. And so it may be that there's just, the point, again, is understand why they're doing what they're doing and create your own system, rather than trying to model it. An example might help clarify this point. In the system of Bruno's Diumbra Siderum, the traditional image of the first decan of Gemini, a servant holding a staff, could stand for the letter combination B, that of Sua, the legendary inventor of chiromancy or palmistry for Ne. The decan symbols are part of a set of images prior to the inventors establishing the order of the syllables. Put in one locus, the whole would spell the word bene. Hermetic Lessons is in the house. Good to see you here. No, we are not looking at Martin Falk's book, but I am hoping to read it soon. This is an article by John Michael Greer, who did this wonderful translation of On the Shadows of the Ideas by Giordano Bruno. All right, so the method has a great deal more subtlety than this one example shows. Bruno's alphabet included 30 letters, the Latin alphabet plus those Greek and Hebrew letters, which have no Latin equivalents. His system thus allowed text written in any of these alphabets to be memorized. He combined these with 5 vowels and provided additional images for single letters to allow for more complex combinations. Besides the astrological images and inventors, there are also lists of objects and adjectives corresponding to this set of letter combinations, and all these can be combined in a single memory image to represent words of several syllables. At the same time, many of the images stand for ideas as well as sounds. Thus, the figure of Sua mentioned above can also represent the art of palmistry if that subject needs to be remembered. Bruno's influence can be traced in nearly every subsequent Hermetic memory treatise, but his own methods seem to have proved too demanding for most magi. Masonic records suggest that his mnemonics, passed on by his student Alexander Dixon, may have been taught in Scots Masonic lodges in the 16th century. More common, though, were methods like the one diagrammed by the Hermetic encyclopedist Robert Flood in his History of the Macrocosm and Microcosm. This was a fairly straightforward adaptation of the late medieval method, using the spheres of the heavens as loci, although Flood nonetheless classified it along with prophecy, geomancy, and astrology as a microcosmic art of human self-knowledge. Both this approach to the art and this classification of it remained standard in esoteric circles until the triumph of Cartesian mechanism in the late 17th century sent the Hermetic tradition underground and the art of memory into oblivion. Oh, that's a little dramatic, don't you think? It's not in oblivion, far from it. All right, let's check in with the chat here. Physico says, that is a law of nature. Every system has its own rhythm. With rhythm, we get systems. Music, beauty, every big thing that someone finds good, it has a system behind it. I want to make my one. Great. At the level of words, what you're saying is making sense, but obviously you need to peer behind the words and see what is beyond all of that, because I will just constantly reject this whole idea of system at the end of the day, because if you're going to focus on system, then you're going to ultimately contradict yourself, because every system needs so much flexibility that it almost shows itself to be something other than a system. It's it's not always the case in certain contexts, but even where it is the case in certain contexts, they're subject to so much decay, either in a micro or a macroscopic way, that it still defies the idea of a system. That's a different topic for a different day. But all of those words that you're saying on the surface of words does have its place, and I hope you have many great adventures creating your system, insofar as that's the right word for what you're doing. The method and its value. This profusion of techniques begs two questions which have to be answered if the art of memory is to be restored to a place in the Western esoteric tradition. First of all, are the methods of the art actually superior to rote memorization as a way of storing information in the human memory? Put more plainly, does the art of memory work? I would say that there's another question. Does it have, first of all, does it have to have anything to do with the esoteric tradition? And the answer is no. And would it be better for us to release it from this while still maintaining the history? So we need a purely secular mnemotechnic, because it doesn't need to be restored to an esoteric tradition. What we would rather perhaps pursue is a harmonization in human culture of the value of traditions and where that value ends, and put a strong period, and now work with secular humanism to help integrate those traditions and have a secular memory tradition. So that's the answer to that. The answer to the question, does the art of memory work? Well, if you're just going to treat it as an art, you're already in trouble, because it's a craft and it's a science as well as an art. And so you want to have those things integrated as well. But let's carry on. It's fair to point out that this has been a subject of dispute since ancient times. Oh yes, if we're disputing it now, aren't we? Or at least I am. Still, then as now, those who dispute the art's effectiveness are generally those who have never tried it. Yes, and that's the problem with Yeats. And this is a problem with all kinds of people. One of the great things of the internet is that people get to communicate with each other. One of the bad things of the internet is that so many people have spewed their opinions about whether or not memory techniques work or not when they haven't even lifted a foot to walk through a single memory palace. That's a bit of a shame. But we don't want to go with book review police anytime soon. Burn the reviewers. They'd rather burn books than burn reviewers, but in any case, we need people to take a course in how to write a book review before that they put any more reviews on the internet. That would be something. Adolfo says, my memory learning system, be like water. Excellent. This is precisely sort of what I mean, this integrative thing. We can draw from Bruce Lee, who's drawing from whatever he's drawing, and we can draw from this, we can draw from that, but we want that flexibility at the end. We want that flexibility. We need it. All right, so in point of fact, the art does work. It allows information to be memorized and recalled more reliably and in far greater quantity than rote methods do. There are good reasons, founded in the nature of memory, why this should be so. The human mind recalls images more easily than ideas, and images charged with emotion more easily still. One's most intense memories, for example, are rarely abstract ideas. It uses chains of association, rather than logical order, to connect one memory with another. Simple mnemonic tricks, like the loop of string tied around a finger, rely on this. It habitually follows with it habitually follows rhythms and repetitive formulae. It's for this reason that poetry is often far easier to remember than prose. Oh, really? The art of memory uses all of these factors systematically. It constructs vivid, arresting images as anchors for chains of association and places these in ordered and repetitive contexts of an imagined building or symbolic structure in which each image and each locus leads on automatically to the next. Well, not necessarily automatically, though. That depends on your skills with creating them. The result, given training and practice, is a memory which works in harmony with its own innate strengths to make the most of its potential. So one thing we need to update here is that it's not necessarily images, it's not necessarily visualization, it's a lot more than that, but so far so good. But there's a caveat, says John Michael Greer. The fact that something can be done, however, does not by itself prove that it should be done. In a time when digital data storage bids fair to render print media obsolete, in particular, questions of how best to memorize information might well seem as relevant as the choice between different ways of making clay tablets for writing. Certainly some methods of doing this once vital chore are better than others. So what? This way of thinking leads to the second question a revival of the art of memory must face. What is the value of this sort of technique? This question is particularly forceful in our present culture because that culture and its technology have consistently tended to neglect innate human capacities and replace them where possible with mechanical equivalents. It would not be going too far to see the whole body of modern Western technology as a system of prosthetics. In this system, print and digital media serve as a prosthetic memory, doing much of the work once done in older societies by the trained minds of mnemonists. It needs to be recognized, too, that these media can handle volumes of information which dwarf the capacity of the human mind. No conceivable art of memory can hold as much information as a medium-sized public library. Well, that depends on what we're calling information. And, that is an important question because not everything that we call information that is in a library actually should be counted as information. So there's some looseness with terminology here. I get his point. I think that this is generally right. We don't have great examples of technology that's actually helping people grow and supplement and accentuate their innate tendencies, other than maybe BitFit, perhaps, or Fitbit, whatever it's called, Fitbit, BitFit, and things of that ilk. But those are not necessarily intellectual in nature. Interesting. The practical value of these ways of storing knowledge, like that of much of our prosthetic technology, is real. At the same time, there is another side to the matter, a side especially relevant to the Hermetic tradition. Any technique has effects on those who use it, and those effects need not be positive ones. Reliance on prosthetics tends to weaken natural abilities. One who uses a car to travel anywhere more than 2 blocks away will come to find even modest walks difficult. The same is equally true of the capacities of the mind. In Islamic countries, for example, it's not at all uncommon to find people who have memorized the entire Quran for devotional purposes. Leave aside for the moment questions of value. How many people in the modern West would be capable of doing the equivalent? Well, that's something to pause upon, because it's not clear that people who have memorized the Quran actually understand what they've memorized. And it's not clear to me that, people are necessarily to have their memory abilities challenged because that they wouldn't memorize a text in a language they don't understand, and so on. So interesting point, but I think it needs some finesse, and it needs some deeper understanding of what exactly is being memorized, how, and the integrity to which that actually is any kind of memorization. Being able to recite something doesn't necessarily mean you've quote-unquote memorized it. Kid Code is in the house and says the information in a library is made from many people, so it's not really fair to compare it to a single person's abilities. Yeah, I think that's a good point as well. It's a kludge, it's an assemblage of many, many different kinds of information from many different kinds of people. And some of that information is also computer derived in some sense. So that's very interesting. Physical says, I think information is always information, but not always knowledge. If an information does not help self-actualization of the individual, it is not knowledge. That's good thoughts. But I don't think what we call information is always information. I don't think that at all. That's clearly not the case. So, for example, sometimes people will go into, I did it the other day. I grabbed my wife and said, look at that teddy bear in the sky. And she was like, what? She's looking at the clouds. And I'm like, no, look, there's a teddy bear in the sky. Well, those clouds were not information. I was making it information, and she was able to see it. So it was not information. It became information, and it actually fits. Was it Claude Shannon or was it Bateson, Gregory Bateson? I think it was Gregory Bateson who says that, information is something that makes a difference, right? It's something that makes a change. And so that cloud, if she had not perceived it as a teddy bear, would make zero change. But the information that I created from it, derived from it, and then persuasively had her acknowledge and recognize, the extent to which I'll never know that she actually did, although she did by all surface indicators was like, whoa, you're right, it is a teddy bear, wow, cute, like all this stuff. And it had this emotional reaction. So what was the information? It certainly wasn't the cloud, right? So information is not information. It's not that easy. And the extent to which it's knowledge, and that knowledge must require self-actualization, I don't think that stands to reason either. For example, is the book you don't read that would help you actualize yourself, is it knowledge or isn't it? Is it knowledge before or after you read it? Is it knowledge before or after you read it 7 times? Or if you got it the first time, is it knowledge? Or is it that you got it and it was knowledge for you that caused self-actualization, but you still didn't tap out the self-actualization always yet to come if you would just read it again? So it needs a little bit more finesse than that. All right. So one goal of the Hermetic tradition, by contrast, is to maximize human capacities as tools for the inner transformations sought by the Hermeticist. Many of the elementary practices of that tradition, and the same is true of esoteric systems worldwide, might best be seen as a kind of mental calisthenics, intended to stretch minds grown stiff from disuse. The quest to expand the powers of the self stands in opposition to the prosthetic culture of the modern West, which has consistently tended to transfer power from the self to the exterior world. The difference between these two viewpoints has a wide range of implications, philosophical, religious, and not the least political, but the place of the art of memory can be found among them. From what might be called the prosthetic standpoint, the art is obsolete because it is less efficient than external data storage methods such as books, and distasteful because it requires the slow development of inner abilities rather than the purchase of a piece of machinery. From a Hermetic standpoint, on the other hand, the art is valuable in the first place as a means of developing one of the capacities of the self, the memory, and in the second place because it uses other capacities, attention, imagination, mental imagery, which have a large role in other aspects of Hermetic practice. Like the other methods of self-development, the art of memory also brings about changes in the nature of the capacity it shapes, not merely in that capacity's efficiency or volume. Its effects are qualitative as well as quantitative, another issue not well addressed by the prosthetic approach. Ordinarily, memory tends to be more or less opaque to consciousness. A misplaced memory vanishes from sight, and any amount of random fishing around may be needed before an associative chain leading to it can be brought up from the depths. In a memory trained by methods of the art, by contrast, the chains of association are always in place, and anything memorized by the art can thus be found as soon as needed. Not necessarily needs to be that those chains of association are already in place. Not necessarily. It depends on the skills you're developing and what you're going for. Nonetheless, equally, it's much easier for the mnemonist to determine what exactly he or she does and does not know, to make connections between different points of knowledge, or to generalize from a set of specific memories. What is stored through the art of memory can be reviewed at will. Despite our culture's distaste for memorization and for the development of the mind generally, the art of memory has some claim to practical value, even beyond its uses as a method of esoteric training. In the second part of this article, The Garden of Memory, some of these potentials will be explored through the exposition of an introductory memory system based on the traditional principles of the art. He is such a good writer. Really, really well written. So, part 2, Garden of Memory. Let's check in with the chat. If you're joining us, hit the thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking. And if you're not subscribed to this channel, get subscribed. Hit the bell icon if you want to go live again and be notified. Generally, head on over to magneticmemorymethod.com for some memory training. There's a free course there for you. If you haven't taken it, I recommend that you do. Kafanal says it's good if your video is supported by the PDF file for the information sharing in your video. I'm not sure what you mean, but if you want a link to this article, you can create a PDF from it. That link is in the description below. Or please let me know more about what you're referring to, because I don't quite understand the question, but thank you for being here. Physico says, that is the point. Knowledge depends on the view of the consumer of the information. Suppose you did not change even with the knowledge, it will be to information until you decide that the information is important. Therefore, from this point will be knowledge to you. Kid Code is here from Indiana. Love your work. Well, thank you. I really love having people from Indiana here. Whereabouts in Indiana? Well, keep that private if you please, but I know someone from Bloomington, and always good to meet another person from Indiana. All right, so who's excited to go through part 2, The Garden of Memory? Let's see what your interest is like, because we certainly don't have to do it. There's other things to do this afternoon. I'm pretending to look at my watch that I don't have on. Roland says, have you used memory palaces to learn music? Yeah, actually, I was just doing this the other day. Let me take a break and show you what I mean. So, memory palaces to use music. Basically, this is the memory palace. Not sure. I don't have the camera set up to do this, but nonetheless, I was learning this passage, which is like... And then it's like, what was that next note? And if memory serves, it must be this one. No. So, you'd be like, well, why isn't memory serving there, right? So, you go... No. Anyway, what you would want to do is you'd want to think, how can I turn this into the memory palace? It's going to be very, very difficult to actually describe this. I don't even know if you can hear from there, but one of the ways you do it is you're learning a piece of music. Can you actually hear that? Oh, I hit a wrong note there. Okay, so Roland can hear. So basically, I mean, I don't do this that much, but if you if you think, I'm trying to think of like a passage where I don't know the note that comes next, and I actually did this. But I did do it the other day. So, but that's the thing. Once you do it, you often lose the mnemonic. But there's this passage that I did it with, and I'm just trying to figure out which one it was. And that's one of these ironies of the memory techniques. Yeah, so so there, that was an example. So my question to my mind was, as I was learning it, was, so like this note right here, was it this note or this note? Because both sound good, right? See, that sounds good as well. But that's actually what it is in the music, and then it goes to C. Right? So all that I need to do to make sure that I remember that it's this and not this is I just look at it and go, okay, so this is G sharp, right? If memory serves. And what we need to do is either create a signature for G numerically derived, or we need to create a signature based on the alphabet, right? And the sharp. So basically there's two ways of doing it. And this is the D string. So Dracula is now involved in Grover and with a knife, right? And it's that easy. You can have now Dracula because it's the D string, but you can also have this being numbered, right? So this is also 06, which is well, I'm trying to, my brain is really fried right now. So sash is what it is. The Métis sash. So you can have that Métis sash there. So if you were to think about this across the thing, right? Let's just do the major method on here. This is E string, Ernie. Open is just Ernie. 01 is the sad mask, or the tragedy mask, better said, in sad position. And then 02 is the sun. So now it's F sharp. 03 is the sandwich from Euphoria Emporium. Very, very obscure, but that's what my image is. Then this is Sartre, the philosopher. This is Sal from Dog Day Afternoon. This is the Métis sash. This is Oliver Sacks. This is Shiva. Now I'm starting to warm up here. This is Brad Zupp, right? This is the Don't Tase Me Bro. This is the Warner Brothers Toad, and then this is Tintin, right? And then this is the Hoover Dam, and it can be J. Edgar Hoover also, or a Hoover vacuum, and we can just keep on going up. And it's exactly all the same stuff, but this is with Ernie. Then A string, Al Pacino, right? So now Al Pacino with the tragedy mask, with the sun, with the sandwich guy, with Sartre, with Sal from Dog Day Afternoon, with the sash, with Oliver Sacks, with Shiva, with Brad Zupp, and then with the Don't Tase Me Bro, and then etc. Right? So then, if you're just thinking, what would it be? And then I usually just think, what is the note? And then I just let it go after that because it gets into place. But I find it useful for just what is the next note kind of material, rather than creating a story for a big line like that's just that'd be too many images. But if you're like, what was the next one? Oh, it was this, like that. So I hope that answers your question. It's pretty easy. But it's like limited use. If you needed to learn all the notes, then that would be a way that you could learn all the notes. Obviously, there's parallels to the piano, etc. I need to work with it more. I always keep promising to work on it more. But at the end of the day, it's got like uses inside of little places where it's just like, oh, is it better to have a G there or a D, G, or is it G or G sharp in that music, etc. And then you just make it certain to yourself by creating a mnemonic image that makes it so clear. And then I don't make that mistake anymore, even though in that particular piece of music, it is my preference. I actually would rather that it was a G instead of a G sharp, but that's just not the way that it is in the composition. So I like to play the composition as it's written. Anyway, if you have more questions about that, do let me know. And there's so much to say, but in this case, I've never gotten around to finishing the course because I'm not sure that it's better than just what I've just said, which is already in the masterclass, and I've taught that technique for that. But if you have more questions around it, basically it's major method turns your instrument into a memory palace. It'll work for piano, it'll work for guitar, it'll work for the flute. I never have tested it on trombone, but I'm sure it'll work on trombone. You don't have that many positions. You'd have to cross-index it against what your lips are doing to work with octaves, etc. I haven't done anything with sitar, but it would certainly work with sitar, and so on. All right. So let's check in with our chats here. Yes, Kidco, don't tase me, bro. That's a good one for 10 if you're looking for something. Okay, so Physical says, I saw the guy talking about Louis. Do you have any book recommendations to learn more about his memory ideas? Yes, read Louis. There's him. Read his stuff. I'm sure you can find it. All right, so that was a fun foray into music. Anybody interested in going through with this second part of the article, part 2, the Garden of Memory? Let me know in the chat if you're excited, or we can close early. I saw Adolfo says yes. Adonis says yes. I'm not sure if that was to going through the article or through you could hear the bass, but let me know if you are interested in this. All right. Adolfo says, sure. For you, we will carry on. We don't need further confirmation. Although I like to see that you guys are interested and active, which is what makes this fun. If you are joining us, hit the thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the chat, and we'll carry on. And I do enjoy all of the participation very, very much. And I love exploring how that we can use the current technology that we have to make something like a little online lecture hall, seminar, whatever you want to call it, the new live seminar stream, something like this. And the more active and engaged you are, the more fun that it gets. I know that these are not the best in the world for live streams, but I tend to leave them up for people if they want to watch replays. But I also need to hear loud and clear that you like this so that I know to continue doing it. And if you have suggestions for what we should do in the future, let me know. I'm thinking the time is right to dive deep into the Western tradition and history a little bit more, a little bit harder, now that I have done my foray with the Advaita Vedanta stuff and memorized a bunch of it. Now we'll see what can be made of the West in deeper detail. I think I saw that Reclaiming Life is off. All right. Super interested. And do have a good sleep, William. We'll see you on the replay. And thanks for being here. All right. So during the Renaissance, the age in which it reached its highest pitch of development, the Hermetic art of memory took on a wide array of different forms. The core principles of the art, developed in ancient times through practical experience of the way human memory works best, are common to the whole range of Renaissance memory treatises. The structures built on this foundation, though, differ enormously. As we'll see, even some basic points of theory and practice were subjects of constant dispute and would be impossible as well as unprofitable to present a single memory system, however generic, as somehow representative of the entire field of Hermetic techniques. That is not my purpose here. As the first part of this essay pointed out, the art of memory has potential value as a practical technique even in today's world of information overload and digital data storage. The memory system will be presented here, the memory system which will be presented here is designed to be used, not merely studied. The techniques contained in it, while almost entirely derived from Renaissance sources, are included for no other reason than the simple fact that they work. Traditional writings on mnemonics generally divide the principles of the art into two categories. The first consists of rules for places, that is, the design or selection of the visualized settings in which mnemonic images are located. The second consists of rules for images, that is, the building of the imagined rooms, the building up of the imagined forms used to encode and store specific memories. This division is sensible enough and will be followed in this essay with the addition of a third category, rules for practice, the principles which enable the art to be effectively learned and put to use. So there's some rules for places coming up. Physico says, Doctor, I'm very grateful to hear your voice and talk about memory, one of my favorite subjects. Going now, till the next time, keep yourself magnetic. You as well. Thanks for being here. Roland says, I think that you're using your base as a memory palace. Yeah, that's what we were talking about. Thanks for that. And let me know if there's any questions about that while I'm here. So, rules for places. One debate which went on through much of the history of the art of memory was a quarrel over whether the mnemonist should visualize real places or imaginary ones as the setting for the mnemonic images of the art. Oh, this argument has never ended. If the half-legendary classical accounts of the art's early phases can be trusted, the first places used in this way were real ones. Certainly, the rhetors of ancient Rome, who developed the art to a high pitch of efficacy, used the physical architecture around them as the framework for their mnemonic systems. Among the Hermetic writers on the art, Robert Flood insisted that real buildings should always be used for memory work, claiming that the use of wholly imaginary structures leads to vagueness and thus a less effective system. On the other hand, many ancient and Renaissance writers on memory, Giordano, Bruno among them, gave the opposite advice. The whole question may in the end be a matter of personal need and temperament. Indeed, it is so. And we know that from research Lynn Kelly has done in the memory code that people just simply did both with the Lukasa and the like. Be that as it may, the system given here uses a resolutely imaginary set of places based on the numerical symbolism of the Renaissance occultism. Borrowing an image much used by the Hermeticists of the Renaissance, I present the key to a garden, Hortus Memorae, the Garden of Memory. The Garden of Memory is laid out in a series of concentric circular paths separated by hedges. The first 4 of these circles are mapped in diagram. Each circle corresponds to a number and has the same number of small gazebos set in it. So Adolfo, this is, gazebos now is something equivalent to the Kohen. These gazebos, an example, the one in the innermost circle, is shown in diagram 2. I don't know why these diagrams are not on this article, but we'll just have to use our imagination, shan't we? All right. So diagram 2 bears symbols which are derived from the Pythagorean number lore of the Renaissance and later magical traditions and serve as the places in this memory garden. Like all memory palaces, these should be imagined as brightly lit and conveniently large. In particular, each gazebo is visualized as large enough to hold an ordinary human being, although it need not be much larger. The first 4 circles of the garden are built up in the imagination as follows. So let's pause before we get into the first circle here. Do you really have to light up your palaces? Let me know if you're a user of memory techniques. Do you light up your memory palaces? If so, that'd be interesting. I've never seen that to be necessary. Like, for example, I do not light up this, and it's not the size of a human. So, a lot has to do not only with personal preference, as Greer mentioned, but it also has to do with what it is you're memorizing. There's no point in trying to establish a universal, quote-unquote, system. What you need to do is think about the information and build what it is that you need in order to memorize that material. You're simply not going to have a one-size-fits-all approach, regardless of what anybody says, Bruno or otherwise. You really need to think about that, the nature of that information, and work accordingly. So the first circle represents, or the first circle corresponds to the monad, the number 1. Its color is white, and its geometrical figure is the circle. A row of white flowers grows at the border of the surrounding hedge. The gazebo is white with gold trim and is topped with a golden circle bearing the number 1. Painted on the dome is the image of a single open eye, while the sides bear the image of the phoenix in flames. Okay, so why don't we actually try to do this in our minds? I didn't get set up to exactly draw, but I want to try to understand this. This is interesting. So we had like a lot of people on here. The instant that some work came up, we dropped a bunch of people. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? I don't think this is work at all. I think this is play. At play in the house of the Lords of Memory. All right, so let's follow the instructions here. So the Garden of Memory is laid out in a series of concentric circle paths separated by hedges. The first 4 of these circles are mapped in diagram. We don't have this diagram. So what we're going to have to do is we have 4 circles. And I'm going to draw 4 circles. See if we can follow along here. So I don't know if that's correct, but there are 4 circles. We need to have some kind of drawing software. Okay, so the first circle corresponds to the monad, the number 1. Its color is white, and it is the geometrical figure is the circle. A row of white flowers grows at the border of the surrounding hedge. The gazebo is white with gold trim and is top. So my first objection to this is like, why? Why do all of this? It just takes so much effort. I'm just going to go with the eye. I'd rather just look at a room and have a memory palace in 2 minutes. This is already taking too long. But there's my eye. The second circle, the next circle corresponds to the dyad, the number 2, and the concept of polarity. All right, I'm not going to be such a lazy monster here. White, it's white is the first one, and it's represented by a circle. So I'm going to put a circle in there, and I'll just imagine the eye shooting white light to remember that it's white. The next circle corresponds to the dyad, the number 2, and to the concept of polarity. Its color is gray. Its primary symbols are the sun and moon, and its geometrical figure is the vesica Pisces, formed from the common area of the 2 overlapping circles. The flowers bordering the hedges in the circle are silver gray, in keeping with the rule of puns, which we'll cover a little later. These might be tulips. Both of the 2 gazebos in the circle are gray, one topped with the number 2 in a white vesica, has white and gold trim, and bears the image of the sun on the dome and that of Adam, his hand on his heart, on the side. The other, topped with the number 3 in black vesica, has black and silver trim and bears the image of the moon on the dome and that of Eve, her hand touching her head on the side. So again, this is like a lot to commit to memory. Is it really necessary? I don't know. I'm just going to put the sun and the moon in there and gray. So gray, how are we going to remember the sun and the moon being gray? There we go. Sun, moon. I guess that guy from McDonald's, remember him? He used to sing Mac the Knife. He was gray. So he's going to be the moon. The third circle. And incidentally, by the way, like all these details, if you did want to take them on, you don't have to memorize them all at once. It could just be sufficient. Number 1, circle 1 is a circle. It was white. Number 2 is the sun and the moon. It was gray. Okay, got it. If I want to come back and add specifics about flowers and all that stuff, you can do it later. So it may not be bad to do all that, or it may not be a waste of time. It's just, if you feel like you're overwhelmed, you could just say to yourself, well, I'll come back and do some of that later. And just get running with the basics. So the third circle corresponds to the triad, the number 3. Its color is black. Its primary symbols are the 3 alchemical principles of sulfur, mercury, and salt, and its geometrical figure is the triangle. The flowers bordering the hedges are black, as are the 3 gazebos. The first of the gazebos has red trim and is topped with the number 4 in a red triangle. It bears on the dome the image of a red man touching his head with both hands, and on the sides the images of various animals. The second gazebo has white trim. Oh, I see. There's all kinds of gazebos in here. Now I get it. The second gazebo has white trim and is topped by the number 5 in a white triangle. It bears on the dome the images of a white hermaphrodite touching its breasts with both hands, and on the sides the images of various plants. The third gazebo is unrelieved black and is topped with the number 6 in a black triangle. It bears on the dome the image of a black woman touching her belly with both hands, and on the sides of the images of various minerals. All right, so that's a lot of overwhelming stuff to memorize, and I'm just going to go with black. So we have white, gray, black, and I'm just going to take the red triangle, maybe not even remember that it's red. So now we have a triangle here. Black triangle, gray, sun and moon, white circle. The fourth circle corresponds to the tetrad, to the number 4. Its color is blue. Its primary symbols are the 4 elements, and its geometrical figure is the square. All right, so I'm just going to put a square in there. The flowers bordering the hedges are blue and 4-petaled, and the 4 gazebos are blue. The first of these has red trim and is topped with the number 7 in a red square. It bears the image of flames on the dome and that of a roaring lion on the sides. The second has yellow trim and is topped with the number 8 in the yellow square. It bears the images of the 4 winds blowing on the dome and that of a man pouring water from a vase on the sides. The third is unrelieved blue and is topped with the number 9 in a blue square. It bears the image of waves on the dome and those of a scorpion, a serpent, and an eagle on the sides. The fourth has green trim and is topped with the number 10 in a green square. It bears on the dome the image of the earth and that of an ox drawing a plow on the sides. To begin with, these 4 circles and 10 memory places will be enough, providing enough room to be useful in practice while still small enough that the system can be learned and put to work in a fairly short time. Additional circles can be added as familiarity makes work with the systems to go more easily. It's possible within the limits of the traditional number symbolism used here to go to a total of 11 circles containing 67 memory palaces. It's equally possible to go on to develop different kinds of memory structures in which images may be placed. So long as the places are distinct and organized in some easily memorable sequence, almost anything will serve. The garden of memory as described here will itself need to be committed to memory if it's to be used in practice. The best way to do this is to simply visualize oneself walking through the garden, stopping at the gazebos to examine them, and then passing on. Imagine the scent of the flowers, the warmth of the sun. As with all forms of visualization work, the key to success is to be found in concrete imagery of all 5 senses. It's a good idea to begin always in the same place. The first circle is best for practical as well as philosophical reasons, and during the learning process, the student should go through the entire garden each time, passing each of the gazebos in numerical order. Both of these habits will help the imagery of the garden take root in the soil of memory. So there's a lot there, and one of the problems is why should you commit anything to memory in order to use this? We'll see what he says in the rules for the images, but I'm already, happy with my blue square, my black triangle, my gray sun and moon, and my white circle. So, and those 4 circles. Now, obviously, I didn't quite understand it when I was beginning, but that's one of the risks of taking action before you read something from beginning to end. But nonetheless, this is more than enough to work with, and we'll see what rules may govern this. If you're just joining us, hit that thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking, and check in with the chat here. Amjad asks, historically, has anyone used memory palace system for scientific formulas? Adolfo answers, yes, it's very easy to stack up formulas with metaphors for comprehension. And yeah, I mean, one of the things that people would have used these memory techniques for is alchemical purposes. There's nothing special about any information. So it's very, very important to not trick yourself into thinking that this or that information has some special property. Every kind of information can be memorized with memory palaces and memory techniques. Jonathan is here from Texarkana. Awesome. Wow. I've never been there. I sure would like to visit there sometime. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for saying hello. So let's carry on. The garden imagery described above makes up half the structure of this memory system. The stable half, one might say, remaining unchanged so long as the system itself is kept in use. The other changing half consists of the images which are used to store memories within the garden. These depend much more on the personal equation than the framing imagery of the garden. What remains in one memory can evaporate quickly from another, and a certain amount of experimentation may be needed to find an approach to memory images which works best for any given student. In the classical art of memory, the one constant rule for these images was that they be striking, hilarious, attractive, hideous, tragic, or simply bizarre. It made and makes no difference, so long as each image caught at the mind and stirred up some response beyond simple recognition. This is one useful approach. For the beginning practitioner, however, thinking of a suitably striking image for each piece of information which is to be recorded can be a difficult matter. It's often more useful, therefore, to use familiarity and order rather than sheer strangeness in an introductory memory system, and the method given here will do precisely this. Yeah, except for the fact that your introductory memory system requires you to memorize so much stuff that if you don't know how to use strange imagery to do that, then, it's a suggestion that collapses itself. Basically, you want to think about, the extent to which you are so incapable of making weird images. I doubt that that's the case. Plus, if you would just work from existing mental content, which is what helps so many people who use the magnetic memory method, you're going to find that you have very, very few problems. If you just draw from what's already in your mind instead of inventing things or memorizing things in order to memorize, I think you'll generally be better off. And one of the issues that is really, really going to be, easy in this case because I've simplified it is, okay, so I'm going to use my first circle here, and I know that it was a circle that was white as the symbol. So great, but now I'm going to memorize something. I don't know, say I meet someone named Charlie. Well, how am I going to have Charlie interact with a white circle inside of a circle, right? Whereas I can just say, hey, Charlie, right? And I can think of him as the person and make him the memory palace and have him beating up Charlie from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and stealing his golden ticket, right? That's using existing mental imagery, and it's a lot faster because I'd otherwise have to think, okay, so Charlie's going to go in circle 1. It was a white circle inside of the circle with an eye, and now the eye is eating him and stuff like that. It's just, whoa, that's a lot. And then I meet another person, and I'm going to be like, yeah, the gray and the gray moon and the sun in the second circle. Oh, like, maybe for some people that will work. This is just already seeming like way too much. And it was a black triangle and a blue square. These are abstractions as opposed to, something. I mean, an Adolfo, and I'm instantly thinking, all right, so what sounds like that name, right? And I might think of Alf, the TV series, for example, which is not that close, but it may get there because I'm thinking of UFO, right? Adolfo. And so on. And there's perhaps more obvious ones, but we don't necessarily want the robots to find out what we're saying here. All right, so it's necessary for this method, first of all, to come up with a list of people whose names begin with each letter of the alphabet, except K and X, which rarely begin words in English. No, but precisely you want those because you're going to need the practice, and you do come up with things. There's lots of K words. These may be people known to the student, media figures, characters from a favorite book. My own system draws extensively from J.R.R. Tolkien's Ring trilogy, so that Aragorn, Boromir, Círdan the Shipwright, and so on tend to populate my memory palaces. It can be useful to have more than one figure for letters, which often come at the beginning of words, for instance, Saruman, as well as the Samgamgee for S, or figures for certain common two-letter combinations, for example, Theoden for TH, where tree is tree bird. But these are developments which can be added later on. The important point is that the list needs to be learned well enough that any letter calls its proper image to mind at once, without hesitation, and that the images are clear and instantly recognizable. Once this is managed, the student will need to come up with a second set of images for the numbers from 0 to 9. There is a long and ornate tradition of such images, mostly based on simple physical similarity between number and image, a javelin or pole for 1, a pair of eyeglasses, or of buttocks for 8, and so on. Any set of images can be used, though, so long as they are simple and distinct. These should also be learned by heart so that they can be called to mind without effort or hesitation. One useful test is to visualize a line of marching men carrying the images which correspond to one's telephone number. When this can be done quickly without mental fumbling, the images are ready for use. Yes, well, you can also get away with having mental fumbling too. You don't have to wait for the mental fumbling to go away. As we saw earlier, it took me a few seconds to get to Sash because I wasn't quite expecting to demonstrate something on the bass guitar. And you will in life be switching gears sometimes. And then the question is, can you just get there by being relaxed and finding it? That's the real thing. Mental fumbling is not to be avoided. The very attempt to avoid mental fumbling will probably make you fumble. So the better strategy is to get relaxed and make it happen anyway. All right, so that use involved two different ways of putting the same imagery to work. One of the hoariest of commonplaces in the whole tradition of the art of memory divides mnemonics into memory for things and memory for words, which there is no difference. All things are referred to by words, are they not? In the system given here, however, the line is drawn in a slightly different place. Memory for concrete things, for example, items in a grocery store list, requires a slightly different approach than memory for abstract things. Whether these be concepts or pieces of text. Concrete things are, on the whole, easier, but both can be done using the same set of images already selected. We'll examine memory for concrete things first. If a grocery list needs to be committed to memory, this, as we'll see, is an excellent way to practice the art. The items on the list can be put in any convenient order. Supposing that 2 sacks of flour are at the head of the list, the figure corresponding to the letter F is placed in the first gazebo, holding the symbol for 2 in one hand and a sack of flour in the other, and carrying or wearing at least one other thing which suggests flour. For example, a chaplet of plated wheat on the figure's head. The garments and accessories of the figure can also be used to record details. For instance, if the flour wanted is whole grain, the figure might wear brown clothing. The same process is done for each item on the list, and the resulting images are visualized one after another in the gazebos of the Garden of Memory. When the garden is next visited in the imagination, in the store in this case, the same images will be in place, ready to communicate their meaning. So I pause on this whole thing about shopping lists being excellent for practice. Maybe. One of the problems there is that it's not like life-changing material, right? And so what if you can basically remember your shopping list? You probably already know most of it anyway. So what you're remembering there is information that is already known to you, and now you're just memorizing an order, right? That's not really a great way to learn these techniques. It's a way to bore yourself silly with them and to prove to yourself that you can memorize an order, a list of things that you already know. Better would be that shopping list in another language. So I would go to that level rather than any sort of straight up shopping list. All right. So, and the wheat example there is good. I like that. He says, this may seem like an extraordinarily complicated way to go about remembering one's groceries, but the complexity of the description is deceptive. Once the art has been practiced, even for a fairly short time, the creation and placement of the images literally takes less time than writing down a shopping list, and their recall is an even faster process. It quickly becomes possible, too, to go to the places in the garden out of their numerical order and still recall the images in full detail. The result is a fast and flexible way of storing information, and one which is unlikely to be accidentally left out in the car. Right. That's a good point, if nothing else. Memory for abstract things, as mentioned earlier, uses the same elements of practice in a slightly different way. A word or a concept often can't be pictured in the imagination the way a sack of flour can, and the range of abstractions which might need to be remembered and discriminated accurately is vastly greater than the possible range of items on a grocery list. How many things are there in a grocery store that are pale brown and start with the letter F? For this reason, it's often necessary to compress more detail into the image of an abstraction. Not a problem, actually. I'm not sure if that's a fair objection or a fair distinction if you use word division and proper association. In this context, one of the most traditional tools, as well as one of the most effective ones, is a principle we'll call the rule of puns. Much of the memory literature throughout the history of the art can be seen as an extended exercise in visual and verbal punning, as when a pair of buttocks appears in the place of the number 8, or when a man named Domitian is used as an image for the Latin words domum aetionum. An abstraction can usually be memorized most easily and effectively by making a concrete pun on it and remembering the pun, and it seems to be regrettably true that the worse the pun, the better the results in mnemonic terms. Well, I appreciate your humor there, but it's not regrettable at all. For instance, if to choose an example wholly at random, one needed to memorize the fact that Streptococcus bacteria cause scarlet fever, rheumatic fever, and streptococcal sore throat, the first task would be the invention of an image for the word streptococcus. One approach might be to turn this word into strapped to carcass and visualize the figure who represents the letter S with a carcass strapped to his or her back by... Sorry, this is not really showing up properly, and I can't quite move it up, so I'm going to have to read it off screen. So strapped to carcass, and visualize the figure who represents the letter S with a carcass strapped to his back by large, highly visible straps. For scarlet fever, perhaps, a videotape labeled Gone with the Wind with a large thermometer sticking out of it and an ice pack on top would serve, while rheumatic fever, perhaps, rheumatic fever could be symbolized by a small model of a house similarly burdened with the thermometer sticking out of the window of an attic room. Both of these would be held by the original figure, whose throat might be red and inflamed to indicate the sore throat. Again, this takes much longer to explain or even to describe than it does to carry out in practice. And that is sort of an issue, but only for people who are not serious students. So what can we do? We need time to explain things. And why would people learn memory techniques if they didn't have a tolerance for large information? Like, why would you need them? You're going to memorize lots of information, so you are most likely already prepared to be tolerant to the amount of explanation that memory techniques require, which is just the nature of this skill. All right. So he says the same approach can be used to memorize a linked series of words, phrases, or ideas, placing a figure for each in one of the gazebos of the Garden of Memory or the places of some more extensive system. Different linked series can be kept in the memory by marking each figure in a given sequence with the same symbol, for example. If the streptococcus image described above is one of a set of medical terms, and all the other figures in the set might wear stethoscopes. Still, these are more advanced techniques and can be explored on the basic methods once the basic method is mastered. And then the article concludes with rules for practice. So let's get into these rules for practice. Like any other method of Hermetic work, the art of memory requires exactly that, work, if its potentials are to be opened up. Although fairly easy to learn and use, it's not an effort-free method, and its rewards are exactly measured by the amount of time and practice put into it. Each student will need to make his or her own judgment here. Still, the old manuals of the art concur that daily practice, if only a few minutes each day, is essential if any real skill is to be developed. The work that needs to be done falls into two parts. The first is preparatory and consists of learning the places and images necessary to put the system to use. This can be done as outlined in the sections above. Learning one's way around the Garden of Memory and memorizing the basic alphabetical and numerical images can usually be done in a few hours of actual work, or perhaps a week of spare moments. The second part is practical and consists of actually using the system to record and remember information. This has to be done relentlessly on a daily basis if the method is to become effective enough to be worth doing at all. It's best by far to work with useful, everyday matters like shopping lists, meeting agendas, daily schedules, and so on. Unlike the irrelevant material sometimes chosen for memory work, these can't simply be ignored, and every time one memorizes or retrieves such a list, the habits of thought vital to the art are reinforced. Good point. Still not convinced by the shopping list argument, but in any case, one of these habits, the habit of success, is particularly important to cultivate here. In a society which tends to denigrate human abilities in favor of technological ones, one often has to convince oneself that a mere human being, unaided by machines, can do anything worthwhile. As with any new skill, therefore, simple tasks should be tried and mastered before complex ones, and the more advanced levels of the art mastered one stage at a time. All right, so I've got a new little memory palace sort of thing to play with here, and I will do so. Pay it its due, maybe make it more elaborate as suggested here. I can see that something about, rather than, just having an empty abstract circle, having it pre-populated with some imagery really, really makes sense. Whether or not white circles and, a gray sun and moon and a black triangle and a blue square is the right stuff for me, I don't know. But that's one reason why I insist again and again and again, is understand the methods underlying this. The methods here is that you want to have something to which you can associate, right? And this is why I would argue, again, that a real memory palace for most people is going to be better than this, simply because it comes preloaded with stuff to which you can associate. You can associate with the walls, you can associate with the corners, you can associate with the floor, you can associate with the ceiling, you can associate with the furniture that's there, you can associate with your own life. Whereas here, I have to think, well, it was a white circle. Oh, but it was also an eye. And then what else? There were some descriptions there. In one of the circles, the flowers were supposed to be red around the edge. And what is that? I don't know any of those things. I don't know what an eye is floating around in space. The sun and the moon, I made more concrete by seeing the figure from the old McDonald's commercials who played Mac the Knife. The black triangle, I had to think in my mind, and what I did there to help me remember that it was a black triangle in the third circle is I just imagined that there's a band called Black Triangle. And then the blue square, there was a show called Blue's Clues, and I just sort of saw a blue square hovering over that guy. So that's something to consider. And obviously, I'm going to go and give this a try and see how that works. Because I chose to memorize much less, then obviously it's easier. But if I were to try to memorize all that stuff, well, it wouldn't take me as long as he suggested, but I would have a bad attitude about it because I just don't see the point of going that elaborate. But here's the thing. He seems to be deriving this from the Hermetic tradition. And if that's the way that they did it, that's very, very interesting to know, and is very interesting to do a little bit of work with to get more familiar with it. And you never know. I may change my mind. I may be like, oh my God, I have just revolutionized everything, right? You never know. So that's why we do these experiments. That's why we learn. That's why we keep come back to it, even if we gripe a little bit and kvetch a little bit. It's great to continue to grow, to build your skills, to try things, even if you don't like them. Because as Sankaracharya says in the Atmabodha, the like-dislike monster will take you down. You got to go beyond what you like or dislike, and just take things for what they are and what they're worth, and really, really explore. So we'll see just how far I explore, but I'm going to do at least the basics. Now I just got to figure out something I want to memorize. Streptococcus doesn't quite seem like information that's going to change my life, but I'm sure when I go and do my daily reading, there'll be something to memorize. Kid Code asks, and as we get into Kid Code's question, we're going to start winding down. If you have any comments or questions as you're with us now, pop them into the chat. If not, and you're watching the replay or you think of something later, you can come back to the replay and pop them in the discussion below. If you're here, hit that thumbs up if you haven't already. Let me know where you are in the chat. And this is your opportunity if you want to ask any questions. And if not, well, we'll answer Kid Code's question and call it a day. All right. Is each gazebo one Loki? He mentioned 11 gazebos would create 60-some palaces. I don't follow that. Yeah, I think that the idea here, good question. The idea here is that these images that he's recommending you memorize inside of the gazebos are the memory palaces. So it's possible that there's a typo or a misattribution of the term memory palace here. Rather, he's maybe referring to what I would call magnetic stations. So I remember in the second circle, there was supposed to be, I believe, Adam was there. And in the third circle, there was going to be a hermaphrodite. So, in the second circle, the sun would be a station. I believe this is what is being taught here. The moon would be a station. Adam would be a station. And then in the third one, the black triangle would be a station. The hermaphrodite would be a station. I think it was in the third circle. It might have been in the fourth. In any case. So one way to think about this, and I'll draw it for you, because you don't necessarily have to do it this way. You don't have to necessarily have images there. If you take any circle and you draw it, you fragment it into quarters. This can be station 1, that can be station 2, station 3, station 4. And that might not lead you to 60 memory palaces, but that's a pretty simple and easy way to get 4 stations out of a circle without any symbols at all. And here's the other thing. If you have a 00 to 99, even if you sometimes stutter or falter, as you will, no matter how good you get at it, well, there you go. So you could have as many of these as it would take to have all your 00 to 99. So there's the sad tragedy mass, there's the sun, there's the Samich, there's Sartre, the philosopher. If I do another one, it'll be Sal, then it'll be Sash, then it'll be Oliver Sacks, then it'll be Shiva, etc. So you don't need to memorize anybody else's images. You could just make up your own and use your 00 to 99 in anything rather than, this. But one fair point is that a lot of this is overwhelming to beginners, and that's the ultimate question. How do you help people begin? And the answer is you try to help them in as many ways as possible to help as many people as possible, and you assume that even people who are already quite good with these techniques might also just take on new things. And that's one of the reasons why this is an interesting and great article, and I wanted to go through it today, is to see what I might learn from it. And one thing that I've learned is that, I should actually just give this a try. So, I've done the work. I've now repeated it so many times. It's probably going to be quite easy for me to say, first circle is white with a circle and an eye. Second circle has the gray sun and the moon. Third circle has the black triangle. Fourth circle has the blue square, right? Wow, there we go. So I've got some tools to play around with. And does it really matter if I derived those images from myself or somebody else? Not really. But what is important is that you dive in, you do the work, and you try it. And where are these 4 circles? Well, here's something for you. They're right here. So this piece of paper is now a memory palace. Isn't that neat? In fact, one way that we can actually practice this right now is just to memorize some cards and use the circles as the station. So let's see here. Ace of Spades, 10 of Hearts, and I'll just use one circle for each one. And what is that? King of Spades, and then 9 of Spades. Okay, so Ace of Spades is with the, this is not a tremendous amount of cards, but see if you actually can remember them from having heard them. Ace of Spades, then it was, so Ace of Spades is now going to beat up the eye, and what was it, 10 of Hearts, I think? 10 of Hearts is going to, yeah. See, this is kind of confusing now because 10 of Hearts already has this image for it. But yeah, it's going to beat up the moon. And then King of Spades, was it? Is going to be interacting with a black triangle. And 9 of Spades, I think we saw, is going to interact with the blue square. Yeah, like I can already see that really It's like unnecessary to me where I'm at. But for you, that might be a thing. Because now I'm just like, these images that are there are interfering with my images for the cards. So it'd be better if they didn't have images in them. It'd be better if it was a memory palace, like a proper memory palace. But let's see what we got. Okay, so we had Ace of Spades. Is that right? And then we had 10 of Hearts, I think. I think it was 10 of Hearts. And then I think we had King of Spades. And then I think we had 9 of Spades. Not a tremendous amount of cards, but let's see how we did. Ace of Spades, 10 of Hearts, King of Spades, and 9 of Spades. Great. So it wasn't the memory palace that helped me remember them, but all the same. I can see that it would need to be something that wasn't cards to memorize in there. But we'll see. Good to see you, Crone Woman Walking. And yeah, I hope that you're able to check out the replay, and I hope to see your thoughts in the comments below. But I'm glad that I tested it with cards, because now I have a sense that cards are an interesting piece of information there, because they already have images. So cards are not cards. When I see cards, I'm not seeing cards. I mean, I'm just seeing the cards, but I'm thinking about what they are. So this might be better with some foreign language vocabulary or something like that. All right. So if there are no further questions, I guess we're going to call this a day. But I hope you enjoyed this. And just as a summary, I think that it really is an interesting article. And it's coming from a particular context that's very interesting to me, and I want to learn more about it. And the whole idea of the Hermetic tradition does seem to have a lot of places where it converges with other traditions around the world. And so it would be an interesting project to see what convergences and divergences we can find, and how that we can translate them into new tools for memory, and perhaps more people use them. So Kid Code says, it seems like you would have to encode the cards as something that specializes those base images, like how he had brown clothes for the bags of whole flour. Right. Yeah, and so, I mean, this is the ultimate question of what it is you want your memory to do and what you want these skills to do. Because I have often thought, except for 00 to 99 PAO, I've always felt that the better skill for daily life and the kinds of things that I do, at least, which are non-competition, the only thing that even gets close to competition that I do is I memorize some cards. And I don't do it for competition purposes. I do it for brain exercise and just a simple thing to do every day. Is that if you are relying on a bunch of pre-existing stuff, well, then you have to use it, right? And I've been many, many times in many, many situations. There's just no time to go, what was that? Or anything like that. And even today we saw it with the bass. I was like, what's 06 again? And because I'm concentrating on different things, it just like took a second. It probably took 20 seconds. I don't know. It would be a waste of time to go back and watch the replay just to count how many seconds it took me before I got back there. But there you're having a kind of ugly sister effect when you're not expecting to show something or teach something, and then you do it, and now all this information is competing in your mind. But in real life, that often doesn't happen, and you just come up with a different alternative. So if I didn't get Sash back for 06, which incidentally has been different things at different times, then I would just try and think of something else. Like I might have put in sushi, for example, if I was memorizing in real time. And sometimes I meet people for whom I have names, stock names, but that name won't come at that moment. So what's the better thing to be able to do? Well, not memorize the name. It's just to come up with something else. And that happens often. And so you train yourself for that outcome. And that's one of the reasons why I don't think it's such a great idea to train yourself by memorizing other people's images. I think what's much better is you learn to derive images in the moment, and you create your own images so that you've gone through the process of creating your own images, and then you're able to do it quickly because you have the training effect of training yourself to do what the skill really is, right? But of course, what the skill really is not necessarily up for me to decide. It's up for you to decide. And so if these things work for you, then by all means. In terms of what you're saying, Kid Code, of having an underlying basis, when I do memorize cards in my practice, I do have an underlying basis, and that underlying basis is all coded with the 00 to 99. So if I can't remember, I don't necessarily always use it, but if I can't remember what was on, say, the fourth station, then I'll just think of the character that represents the fourth station, and that will often trigger off whatever that first card is, and then the whole sequence will come. And that's that. So, in this case, if I was thinking, okay, what was that first card we just saw? I think it was Ace of Spades, right? Then if I didn't get Ace of Spades, I would just think, well, what's 01? It's the Tragedy Mask. And that would give me something to work on because it has a background. It has a background in addition to the Memory Palace. But it's just a card, right? It's not like life epic changing information. So wonderful session today. Thanks everybody who was active in the chat. Really appreciate it. And hope to see those of you who like these live streams the next time. And if you haven't let me know that you actually like and appreciate these, do please let me know either in the chat now or in a discussion post, because I continue them based on your interest, your participation, and knowing that you appreciate them. And let me know what you would like to see on a future live stream, because with that feedback, I can actually put something together if that I feel that I have something to say on that topic. This is a public service for you. The more you're involved in it, the more you're active in it and engaged in it, then ultimately the more that you get. It's really something that you can help create more of by being active in the discussion. And let me know what you'd like to see on a future show, if anything at all, and we'll keep it going. But I really, really have a lot of fun on these sessions, and I think I would like to do more on perhaps not the Hermetic art of memory, but more on the history, reading through more articles. And I'd love to hear from you if you would like that as well, because I can certainly read these on my own, and will do so if I don't hear enough interest from you all. And I'm listening even to silence. So thanks again, everybody, for a great session today. Really appreciate it. Till we have a chance to speak again, come visit me at magneticmemorymethod.com and keep yourself magnetic. Bye-bye.